I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, its screen cracked but still functioning. One name stood out in my contacts: Olivia. She had been my best friend once, before I let Nathan isolate me from everyone who cared, before I let myself become a shadow of the person I used to be. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the call button. Would she even answer? I swallowed, forcing myself to press dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to give up when her voice came through the line, groggy and confused. "Emily." My breath hitched. "Soph, I need help." There was a pause. Then, without hesitation, she said, "Where are you?" "I'm coming." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The rain came down in sheets, drenching me to the bone. My fingers trembled as I hovered over Olivia's doorbell, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What if she doesn't want to see me? It had been years since I had last stood outside Olivia's apartment. Years since I let Nathan convince me that my friendships weren't important, that he was all I needed. I had been so blind. Now I was standing here, soaked, humiliated, and clutching the last remnants of my old life. My heart pounded as I swallowed hard and forced myself to press the doorbell. A moment passed, then another. Just as I was about to turn away, the door swung open. Olivia stood there in a loose sweatshirt and pajama pants, her dark hair a tangled mess. Her sharp green eyes widened in shock as she took me in. The drenched clothes, the dark circles under my eyes, the sheer exhaustion in my stance. "Emily?" Her voice was laced with disbelief, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Oh my God, what happened?" My throat tightened. The words wouldn't come. I had prepared for this moment. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain why I disappeared for so long, why I let Nathan dictate every aspect of my life. But all of that fell apart as soon as I saw her face. I tried to speak, but a choked sob escaped instead. Without hesitation, Olivia grabbed my wrist and yanked me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The warmth of her apartment wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile house I had just left behind. The place was cluttered but cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and books stacked in every corner. String lights twinkled above the couch, and the air smelled like vanilla and coffee. It felt alive, so different from the lifeless perfection Nathan had demanded. Olivia disappeared for a moment, returning with a towel and a change of clothes. "You're soaked," she muttered, thrusting them at me. "Go dry off, then you're telling me everything." I hesitated, guilt gnawing at me. "Liv, She held up a hand. "Go." I did as I was told. When I came back, Olivia was waiting at the kitchen table, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. "Sit," she said, her tone softer now. I sank into the chair, wrapping my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my frozen fingers. I hadn't realized how cold I was until now. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "I should be furious with you, you know." I flinched. "I know." "You disappeared. You cut me out, ignored my calls, pretended I didn't exist." Guilt curled in my stomach. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Nathan, I know what he did." Olivia's expression darkened. "I knew something was wrong. I tried to tell you." I nodded, blinking back tears, and I didn't listen. Silence settled between us, thick with the weight of all the years we had lost. Then Olivia sighed and leaned back in her chair. "But you're here now." That was all she said. She didn't demand an explanation. She didn't make me beg for forgiveness. She just let me be here. For the first time in years, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. I took a slow breath and whispered, "I left him." The words hung between us, heavier than I expected. Olivia stared at me for a moment, then set her mug down with a thud. "Good." I let out a shaky laugh, half expecting her to ask if I was sure, if I had thought it through. But she didn't. She just nodded like she had been waiting for this day. "You can stay here," she said firmly, "as long as you need." I exhaled, my whole body sagging with relief. You don't have to. I want to, she cut in. And don't even think about arguing with me. I shut my mouth. A beat passed, then another. Finally, Olivia leaned forward, her voice gentle but serious. Emily, does he know where you are? A shiver ran down my spine. Not yet. She narrowed her eyes. But he will. I swallowed hard. Yeah. Nathan wouldn't let me go easily. I knew that. But for tonight, I wasn't going to think about him. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I took another sip of my coffee, letting the warmth chase away the lingering chill of the past. And when Olivia pulled out a business card the next morning and slid it across the table, I didn't hesitate. Jessica Brooks, she said, Seattle's best divorce attorney. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters, my heart hammering in my chest. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time since leaving Nathan's house, I felt something close to hope. Jessica Brooks was nothing like I had imagined. She wasn't stiff or cold, like the lawyers I'd seen on TV. No, Jessica was sharp, confident, and radiated a quiet authority that made it clear she had seen it all before. Her office in downtown Seattle was sleek and modern, floor-to-ceiling windows casting long shadows across the polished oak desk where she now sat, flipping through my financial records with an increasingly dark expression. The longer she read, the tighter my stomach clenched. Finally, she exhaled through her nose and set the papers down. Emily, she said, her voice clipped, do you have access to any joint accounts? I hesitated. Nathan had always handled our finances. He told me it was easier that way, less complicated, less stressful, less in my control. But there was one account, a joint savings account we had opened when we first got married. Nathan had probably forgotten all about it. He always brushed it off as small potatoes. Yes, I murmured. I think so. Jessica's sharp eyes locked onto mine. Can you log in? My hands felt clammy as I reached for my phone and opened the banking app. I hadn't checked this account in years. My fingers trembled as I typed in my credentials. A few seconds later, the balance loaded, and my blood ran cold. The account, once filled with over $200,000, was nearly empty. But it wasn't just the missing money that sent panic clawing up my throat. It was where it had gone. Large, repeated transactions to accounts I didn't recognize. Some offshore, some disguised as business expenses, all of it just gone. I looked up at Jessica, my mouth dry. I don't understand. Her jaw tightened. I do. She spun her laptop around and started typing, her nails clicking against the keyboard with deadly precision. Nathan isn't just a control freak, she said, eyes scanning the screen. He's been hiding assets. I blinked. What? She glanced up, her expression serious. And that, Emily, is fraud. The word hit me like a slap. Fraud. I had spent years thinking I was just trapped in a bad marriage, that Nathan was cruel, manipulative, emotionally abusive. Yes, but criminal? I clenched my fists. How could I have been so blind? Jessica leaned forward, her elbows resting on the desk. We can use this, Emily. If we can prove Nathan concealed assets during the marriage, especially before the divorce proceedings started, he's looking at serious legal trouble. The room suddenly felt too small. I gripped the edges of my chair. What does that mean for me? She studied me carefully, her gaze assessing. It means you have leverage, a lot of it. We're not just talking about alimony or asset division anymore. A chill ran down my spine. So what are we talking about? Jessica's expression hardened. We're talking about war. The gravity of her words settled over me like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. Nathan had spent years making sure I had nothing. No job, no financial independence, no control. And now, sitting in Jessica's office, staring at the irrefutable proof of his deception, I realized something. He had made a mistake. He had underestimated me. For the first time in years, I had the upper hand. My pulse thundered in my ears as Jessica slid a thick stack of legal documents across the desk toward me. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. I stared down at the crisp pages, my name already typed neatly at the top. Lawsuit papers. This wasn't just about leaving him anymore. This was about taking back what he stole from me. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen, and signed my name. Nathan Carter had no idea what was coming. Nathan Carter leaned back in his leather chair, the soft creak of the seat beneath him the only sound in the spacious, high-rise office. His gaze flickered toward the text on his phone, and a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "See you in court." Emily had never been one for theatrics, but this was almost amusing. He set his phone down, exhaling through his nose in amusement. She thought she could fight him? Beat him at a game he had mastered long before she had even met him? She was bluffing. She had to be. She wasn't a fighter. He had made sure of that. For years, he had chipped away at her confidence, her independence, her ability to stand on her own. She had always folded, always apologized. This was just another tantrum. He had given her a taste of freedom, sure. Let her stew in her own foolishness, but she'd come crawling back. They always did. And when she did, he'd remind her exactly why she should have never left in the first place. The evening found him seated at Lember, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, where tables had month-long waiting lists, and the wine list was longer than most people's mortgages. The restaurant buzzed with the soft hum of conversation, the occasional clink of crystal against fine china. Nathan swirled the amber liquid in his glass, eyes scanning the elegant dining room while his associates carried on. He wasn't paying attention to their conversation. His mind was still on Emily's text. Maybe he should call her, play the role of the concerned husband, pull her back in. She had always been so desperate to believe him, to believe in him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. Two men in dark suits entered the restaurant, their movements precise, their faces unreadable. They weren't here for dinner. Nathan barely had time to process what was happening before a thick envelope landed on the pristine, white linen tablecloth in front of him. One of the men, a tall, no-nonsense type, adjusted his cufflinks and cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "you've been served." Nathan let out a low, humorless laugh, picking up the envelope with an air of amusement. He flipped it between his fingers, glancing at the men standing beside the table. "Cute," he muttered, reaching into his wallet. "Let me guess," he said, pulling out a few crisp $100 bills. "Emily's little legal stunt? How much to make this go away?" The second man, a shorter, stockier lawyer with a razor-sharp gaze, didn't even blink. "This isn't a negotiation," he said coolly. Nathan's smirk faltered. He ripped open the envelope, eyes scanning the first page. His heartbeat stuttered. Destruction of property, financial damages, fraud investigation pending. The words blurred as his mind caught up to the reality of what he was holding. His grip tightened around the paper. Emily had actually done it. She had actually gone through with it. His laugh died in his throat. The restaurant suddenly felt too loud. The soft murmur of conversations, the gentle clinking of glasses, the flickering candlelight, it all grated against his nerves. This was not how things were supposed to go. Emily was supposed to break, not come back swinging. His jaw tensed as he shoved the papers into his briefcase, barely acknowledging the lawyers as they turned and walked away. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Nathan Carter wasn't the kind of man who lost. He was untouchable. At least he had been. His fingers curled around his phone, his grip tightening as he scrolled through his contacts. Before he could think twice, he dialed the one person who had always bailed him out. The line rang twice before a sharp, clipped voice answered. Nathan. His mother never wasted words. She was always direct, always in control. She knew before he even spoke that something was wrong. He swallowed the bitterness in his throat, his fingers gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We have a problem." Nathan Carter woke up feeling victorious. He had slept well, convinced that by now Emily would be regretting everything. The past week had likely been a rude awakening for her. No money, no resources, no plan. She was probably realizing just how difficult it was to survive without him, without the comforts he had so generously provided. He imagined her standing outside his door, teary-eyed, her voice trembling as she pleaded for forgiveness. "I made a mistake, Nathan. Please, let's fix this." He would have let her wait, let her suffer in her foolishness. Then, once she had begged enough, he would have let her crawl back, on his terms. That was how this was supposed to go. But when the knock finally came, it wasn't Emily. Nathan opened the door and was met with two men in dark suits standing on his front steps, their expressions unreadable. The crisp morning air carried the faint sound of birds chirping, an unsettling contrast to the storm brewing in his chest. The taller of the two men adjusted his tie before speaking. "Mr. Carter, we're here regarding the civil suit filed against you for destruction of property and financial damages." Nathan's smirk barely had time to form before it faltered. A lawsuit? The second man, shorter and stockier, stepped forward, his voice even. "Additionally, we regret to inform you that the home you currently live in is no longer yours." For a moment, Nathan didn't process the words. His grip on the doorframe tightened as his eyes flickered between the two men. "What the hell are you talking about?" The first lawyer remained composed, flipping through a document. "Per the divorce settlement, Mrs. Carter has exercised her right to buy out your share of the house." Nathan let out a sharp laugh, one that lacked any real amusement. "That's ridiculous. She doesn't have that kind of money." The second lawyer's gaze didn't waver. "She does now." Nathan felt his stomach drop. His fingers twitched as he yanked the stack of official legal documents from the man's hands. He flipped through the pages, his breath coming shorter with every line he skimmed. His name was there, the ink bold and undeniable. It was real. It was binding. Emily had outmaneuvered him. His jaw clenched, his pulse hammering against his temples. He had underestimated her. He had spent years molding her into someone obedient, someone too afraid to fight back. Yet here he was, standing in the doorway of what was no longer his home, holding paperwork that ensured his downfall. His kingdom was slipping through his fingers, and Emily had been the one to set it on fire. The lawyers remained silent, waiting. Their presence only made his rage simmer hotter beneath his skin. Nathan forced himself to inhale slowly, his mind scrambling for a way to reverse this. There had to be a loophole, some technicality that would get him out of this. "You can't do this," he growled. "It's already done," the first lawyer said matter-of-factly. "You have 2 weeks to vacate the premises before formal eviction proceedings begin." The words felt like a noose tightening around his throat. This house, his house, was supposed to be untouchable. He had built his life on control, on the certainty that people like Emily couldn't win. But she had won, and she had done it without even looking back. Nathan's hands clenched into fists, his nails dug into his palms, but he barely felt it. This wasn't over. He straightened his spine, forcing a smirk that he no longer felt. "I'll fight this." The first lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome to try." Neither man looked intimidated. They weren't here to argue. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to deliver reality to a man who thought he was invincible. Nathan wanted to slam the door in their faces. He wanted to rip the papers apart and set them on fire. But he knew better. He had spent years using the legal system to his advantage. Now, for the first time, he was on the losing end of it. The lawyers turned and walked away, their suits crisp, their steps unhurried. Nathan stood motionless, gripping the paperwork so tightly his knuckles turned white. His empire was crumbling. He had spent his entire life one step ahead of everyone, always controlling the game. Now the pieces were falling in ways he hadn't foreseen, and for the first time, he had no countermove. His first instinct was to call Emily, to demand an explanation, to remind her who he was. But he knew she wouldn't answer. She wasn't his to command anymore. That left only one option: his mother. His thumb hovered over the call button as he stared at her name in his contacts. She always answered. Always. The phone rang once, then twice. By the third ring, doubt began to settle in his gut. By the fifth, his hands felt clammy. Then, the call went to voicemail. Nathan froze. For the first time in his life, his mother wasn't picking up. Panic wrapped around his throat like a vice. He grabbed his keys and stormed out the door. If she wouldn't answer, he would find her himself, and she would fix this. She always did. Margaret Carter savored the smooth bitterness of her espresso as she settled into the plush leather chair in her penthouse's sunlit lounge. The early morning light reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of downtown Seattle, a city she had long ago learned to control. The wealth, the influence, the carefully curated social standing, none of it had come by accident. She had built this life with ruthless precision, ensuring she was always on the winning side. She flipped open the newspaper, scanning the headlines with detached interest until a name caught her attention. Nathan Carter embroiled in financial scandal. Divorce battle intensifies. Her lips pursed as she read through the article, detailing not only Emily's lawsuit, but also the fraud allegations now looming over her son. She had spent years crafting an image of Nathan as a successful businessman, a leader in his field. But now he had let himself become careless, sloppy. She sighed and closed the paper. She had always known Nathan wasn't the sharpest. His father had been the same, entitled, arrogant, expecting the world to bend for him simply because he was a Carter. Margaret had spent a lifetime cleaning up their messes. But this time something felt different. A sharp banging on her front door disrupted her morning routine. She didn't need to guess who it was. The door flew open before her butler could reach it, and Nathan stormed inside. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, his hair a disheveled mess. His eyes were wild, frantic, a stark contrast to the man who had once strutted through life with untouchable confidence. "Mom," he gasped, barely catching his breath. "I need your help." Margaret said nothing at first. She simply observed him, as though he were a stranger. Her son had always been reckless, always assumed she would be there to fix things. It was what she had done his entire life, covering for him, smoothing over his mistakes, ensuring his reputation remained intact. She took another slow sip of her coffee. "So, you finally managed to ruin yourself," she said, her voice calm, almost bored. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "Mom, this isn't funny. That bitch." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "Don't," she warned, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I told you not to marry her if you weren't prepared for the consequences of treating her like one of your disposable toys." Nathan gritted his teeth. "Emily is trying to take everything. She's suing me for damages. She's got lawyers digging into my finances, and—" Margaret interrupted, setting her coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. "And let me guess. She found something." Nathan hesitated. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Mom, I could lose everything." Margaret leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with effortless poise. "You already have." Nathan stared at her, disbelief etched onto his face. What do you mean?" Margaret inhaled slowly, as if the conversation was an inconvenience rather than a crisis. "Tell me, Nathan, why should I help you? Give me one good reason." His face twisted in frustration. "Because I'm your son. And you think that entitles you to unlimited rescues?" Her voice remained smooth, but her words struck like a whip. For the first time, Nathan seemed to realize she wasn't going to reach for her checkbook. She wasn't going to call her high-powered attorneys or pull strings with her connections. The truth crashed into him like a freight train. Margaret Carter, the one person who had always shielded him, was stepping aside. His hands curled into fists. "So what? You're just going to let me drown?" Margaret exhaled through her nose, as if his theatrics were exhausting. "Let's be honest, Nathan. You did this to yourself. You married a woman you couldn't control. You underestimated her, and now you're losing, not because of Emily, but because of your own arrogance." His face turned red, his nostrils flaring. "I don't lose." Margaret gave him a pitying smile. "Then why are you here?" Nathan's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might break. His entire world was unraveling, and the one person who had always pulled the strings to protect him was now cutting them loose. "You always said family is everything," he accused. Margaret raised a single brow. "I also said weakness is unacceptable, and right now, you reek of it." A heavy silence fell between them. Nathan's chest heaved, his breath sharp, his mind scrambling for a way to regain control. But there was no control left to seize. Margaret lifted her coffee cup once more, giving him a pointed look over the rim. "Get out of my penthouse." His hands trembled at his sides. "You're really doing this?" She took a sip, unfazed. "I should have done it years ago." Nathan stood there for another agonizing second before storming out, slamming the door behind him so hard the walls trembled. But Margaret didn't flinch. She simply took another sip of her coffee, turned the page of her newspaper, and continued with her morning. Across the city, in a quiet law office, Emily Carter was finalizing her last set of documents. Her pen glided smoothly over the page, signing off on the final transfer of property. The house was hers. The past was no longer her burden to carry. She set the pen down and let out a slow breath, the weight she had carried for years finally lifting from her shoulders. Nathan had always thought he owned everything, his home, his marriage, his power over others. But as of today, Emily Carter owned the one thing he never could, her freedom. Emily sat at her desk, fingers tracing the golden embossed letters on the official business license, Phoenix Rising. The name had come to her in a moment of clarity, a reflection of everything she had endured, everything she had overcome. Rising from the ashes, stronger, untouchable. Her office was small, tucked into a quiet street in downtown Seattle, but it was hers. The walls were painted a warm shade of ivory. The windows let in just enough light, and every desk was covered in neatly stacked case files, resources, and legal documents. A quiet hum of activity filled the space, volunteers answering phones, social workers guiding women toward a new future. This was what freedom looked like. A gentle knock at her door pulled Emily from her thoughts. Olivia peeked inside. Her ever-reliable best friend, the one who had been there since the night she left Nathan. "You ready for your first official client?" Olivia asked, grinning. Emily exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be." A woman stepped into the office, hesitant, her movements uncertain, as if she might bolt at any second. She was young, early 20s maybe, but exhaustion and fear had aged her. Her hands clutched the straps of her worn-out purse like a lifeline, and her eyes flicked around the room, searching for an escape route. Emily knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror once. "Hi, Mia," Emily said gently, standing and gesturing toward a chair. "You're safe here." Mia hesitated before sitting, her shoulders tense, her fingers gripping the fabric of her jeans. I don't know why I came. I saw the flyer at the coffee shop and Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." Emily exchanged a glance with Olivia, who gave a reassuring nod before stepping out to give them privacy. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Emily said, keeping her voice steady. "Just tell me what's going on. We'll figure out the rest together." Mia hesitated. Then, with a shaky breath, she began. She spoke of a husband who controlled every part of her life, how he monitored her phone, decided what she could wear, dictated who she could talk to. She hadn't seen her family in months because it made him uncomfortable. If she tried to speak up, she was met with cold silence, as if she didn't exist at all. Emily listened, nodding in understanding. She had lived this story before. "I thought if I loved him enough, he'd change," Mia whispered. "But I think," she swallowed, eyes welling with tears, "I think he just likes keeping me scared." Emily's heart clenched. "That's what I used to think too," she admitted. I spent years making myself smaller, trying to be someone I wasn't, hoping it would make him love me. But that's not love, Mia. It never was. Mia wiped at her cheeks, nodding slowly. I think I want to leave, but I don't know how. Emily reached across the desk, offering her hand. Then let's make a plan. Mia hesitated before placing her shaking fingers over Emily's. It was small, barely a movement, but it was enough. Just as Emily opened a folder to outline the next steps, a loud bang echoed through the office. Mia jumped. Emily's stomach clenched. From outside the window, a man stood, fists pressed against the glass, his face twisted in rage. "Mia, get out here now!" Mia recoiled, trembling. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He found me!" Emily stood immediately, her body moving on instinct. "Stay here," she ordered, before striding toward the door, her heart hammering but her steps steady. Mia's husband was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his expensive suit unbuttoned, his blonde hair a mess as if he had run straight from work. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his face red with fury. Emily recognized the look. She had seen it in Nathan before. "You can't be here," she said firmly, stepping between him and the door. His eyes snapped to her, narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who isn't afraid of you," Emily replied, unblinking. He scoffed. "That's cute, but my wife and I need to have a little chat." "Your wife is busy." Emily didn't budge. "And she's not going anywhere with you." The man sneered. "You think you can just steal someone's wife and what? Fix her." His gaze flicked over Emily, his lips curling in disgust. "Let me guess. Some bitter divorcee who thinks she can save every miserable woman who threw away a good man?" The words should have hurt. Once upon a time, they might have. But Emily didn't flinch. "You should leave," she said simply, her voice even, unwavering. "Or we can involve the police. Your choice." His nostrils flared. Then, before he could say another word, Mia stepped forward. Emily turned, startled. Mia's hands were still shaking, but her spine was straighter, her chin lifted just slightly. And then, in a quiet but firm voice, she said, "I'm not going with you." Her husband froze. "Mia!" "No." The single word sliced through the air. "You don't control me anymore." A stunned silence stretched between them. Emily held her breath, waiting. And then, just like that, Mia turned. She reached for Emily's hand, gripping it tightly, and together they stepped back into the office. The door shut. Mia exhaled, her body trembling. Emily squeezed her hand. "You did it." Mia let out a soft, breathless laugh, half disbelief, half relief. "I did, didn't I?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, and you're going to be okay." As they walked toward the back office, Olivia rushed over, whispering, "Security's on their way, he's not getting in." Mia nodded, still gripping Emily's hand, and for the first time, the girl who had walked in looking like a ghost finally looked alive. Emily sat beside her, helping her fill out the paperwork for emergency housing. But as she watched Mia's confidence grow, a realization settled deep in her bones. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She had built something that mattered, something that could change lives. For years, her past had haunted her, but now it fueled her. Nathan Carter stood outside the glass doors of Phoenix Rising, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket. The wind carried the sounds of the city, honking cars, distant conversations, the steady rhythm of life moving forward. But inside, beyond the glass, time seemed to stand still. Emily. She sat at her desk, laughing at something Olivia had said, her head tilting back slightly, the warmth of the moment evident even from where he stood. It was a sight he had never truly appreciated before. She looked different, stronger, lighter, happier, his fingers curled into fists. He had spent months watching everything slip away, his home, his reputation, his business ties. Now this was all that remained, a desperate attempt to reclaim something, anything. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A soft chime rang as he stepped inside. Emily turned. For a brief second, there was no recognition in her eyes. No shock, no anger, just indifference. Like he was no one. Like he had never mattered at all. That hurt more than anything else. Her gaze flickered to Olivia, who immediately straightened, stepping closer, ready to intervene. Emily held up a hand. "It's fine." Nathan took a cautious step forward. "Can we talk?" She studied him, then exhaled. "Outside." He followed as she led him through the doors, stopping just beneath the awning. The cold air nipped at his skin, but he barely noticed. Now that he was here, he wasn't sure where to start. Emily folded her arms. "What do you want, Nathan?" He swallowed hard. "I've changed." Her expression didn't shift. No flicker of doubt, no curiosity, just silence. He cleared his throat. "I lost everything, you know, after you left. It made me—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It made me think about the way I treated you, about how I took you for granted." Still, nothing. "I was an idiot," he continued, his voice quieter. I get it now. I understand why you left." Emily sighed, her breath curling in the cold air. "You say that like it changes something." His chest tightened. "I know it doesn't fix anything," he admitted. "But can't we at least talk? We had a life together, Emily." For the first time, she smiled. But it wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of someone who had won. "No, Nathan," she said softly. "I had a sentence, and I finished serving my time." Nathan flinched. "That's not fair." "No," she cut in, her voice firm. "What wasn't fair was you treating me like an object you owned. What wasn't fair was you smashing my laptop, throwing divorce papers at me like a game, expecting me to crawl back. And what really wasn't fair was that it took me years to realize I never needed you at all." His breathing grew uneven. Emily didn't look away. "I don't need your apology," she said simply. "I don't need anything from you." He took a step closer, but she stepped back. That final inch between them might as well have been a canyon. Emily turned without another word, walking back toward the entrance. He should have called after her, should have reached for her, begged her to stay, tried to make her see that he meant every word. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew. There was no coming back from this. She stepped inside without hesitation. Inside, Olivia and Mia were waiting, both watching carefully. Emily barely acknowledged them as she reached for the door. Then, with one final, effortless motion, she shut it behind her, shutting him out forever. Nathan stood there for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the glass. Once he had been the center of her world. Now he was just a ghost she had left behind. Inside, the phoenix had risen. "I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that if I tried hard enough, loved deeply enough, forgave endlessly enough, I could change someone who didn't want to change. I thought my silence kept the peace, but in reality, it only deepened my prison. Walking away wasn't just about leaving a man who broke me. It was about reclaiming the woman I was before he ever tried. It was about understanding that love should never require you to lose yourself, that true strength isn't in enduring pain, but in choosing to rise above it. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've felt trapped, unheard, or convinced that you weren't strong enough to leave. But let me tell you this. You are stronger than you think. And no matter how many times someone tries to tear you down, you always have the power to stand back up. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment in life where walking away was the hardest but most necessary decision? What gave you the courage to take that first step? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story resonated with you, or let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all. And if this video touched you, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our stories, so no one has to feel alone. Remember, you don't have to stay in a place where you're only valued for how much you can endure. You are worth more than survival. You deserve to thrive.